there's a change in schedule. This week is supposed to be on population and urbanization, right? But I changed it to economic development because it does not do justice to just devote 1 week to economic development, because if you think about why Korea is receiving the kind of attention that it's getting, it's not just Hallyu. There's more to Hallyu than what it appears. It's really about Korea having achieved this remarkable economic development, and we have to, I think, devote more time trying to understand what it is all about, and then to talk about how it happened, okay? Because to this day, leaders and policymakers from many developing countries come to Korea to learn what Korea did right, to see if they could emulate Korea's success, right? So we'll spend 2 weeks classes on economic development, all right? So, and today, because we're like almost 20 minutes behind, as Jaeung told you, there will be no break today. We'll just go straight till 7 o'clock. Is everyone ready? I hope you are, all right? Because it's an exciting stuff. Economic development. All right. Okay, as you can see here, instead of, again, population and urbanization, it's been replaced by economic development 1, economic development 2, okay? So do you think something on this part will be on the exam or not? If you say yes, it will be on the final exam. It'll still be on the final exam. Okay. Economic development of Korea, the miracle on the Han River. I think it's a very nice, apt title or subtitle. And lecture outline is simple enough. I think this is probably the shortest, or having just a few items, right? So it's Korean economy, an overview. I will spend a lot of time on this one because it's sort of a storytelling that is so remarkable. And I don't know if I'm saying this because I'm Korean, but I think you will empathize with me for me being so passionate about this. Because how many countries can you think of since the end of World War II which has achieved a level of economic development where the living standard of any country has reached that of an economically developed nation? I'm not talking about just a country whose GDP increased noticeably. I'm talking about people in any given country since the end of World War II whose living standard has reached the level of economically developed nations. And I'm talking about just the countries with a sizable population. I'm not talking about city-state like Singapore, okay? But a country with at least, let's say, 10 million population. The answer is, there's only one country, and that is South Korea, okay? And I'll share with you more about these kinds of unique aspects of industrialization that has taken place in Korea. All right. 4 Ds characterize Korea. Do you know what those 4 Ds are? Remember, there was another thing about D, right? Divorce, death, right? But this one is about the country. Can you think of any? 4? Just use your imagination and come up with something. Yeah. Okay, very good. Development. What's the other two? Just give me one more. Okay. Well, here are the four. Division, okay, Korea, South Korea, North Korea. Dictatorship, I don't know if you know, but until like 1987, many sort of periods from like 1948 till 1987, there were periods of dictatorship. Third, democratization. Okay, so since 1987, we have sort of a democracy. And fourth, development. Okay, so of these 4 Ds, the focus of today's class and next week will be development. Okay. Currently, Korea's GDP is $1.761 trillion. And that's the 14th largest in the world. Okay? And here is a table. You can see this is the US, number 1, China, number 2, Germany, number 3, and so on, right? So Korea was ranked as high as 10th like 2 years ago, but we're sort of falling back a bit. But we're just an inch behind Australia. Okay, I don't know if that's a correct expression, but just slightly off the level of Australia. But anyway, Korea's GDP in 1953 was, can you read that? $1.3 billion. So do your little mathematics here. So again, Korea's GDP this year is $1.761 trillion. Back in 1953, the total was $1.3 billion. So how many times did Korea's GDP jump by during that period, roughly? Here it is. Korea's GDP jumped more than 1,300 times in that time span. Do you know of any other countries where the total GDP jumped anywhere close to that? So, if I sound a little bit overly nationalistic, don't think so. I'm just astounded by what happened, really. That's it. I think I'm being objective here. Well, we'll see. Okay, 1,354 times, and that's why the saying goes like this: the miracle on the Han River. Okay. So as you can see in this figure, 1.35 billion to, again, 1.761 trillion dollars, and so on. Another noteworthy fact about the Korean economic achievement is this. In July 2021, it's already been like 3 years, the UN Conference on Trade and Development changed Korea's status from a developing country to a developed country. UN does this, right? UN designates certain countries as developed, certain countries as developing. I mean, they do this 2-tier criteria. So, Korea became the first and only country in the history of the UN Trade Conference on Trade and Development. I mean, it is safe to say, for the first time ever in the history of the UN, Korea became the first country to be officially recognized for this economic achievement. So again, some countries may have developed this way, that way, but again, Korea is the only country to receive this official recognition, okay? So it has made this transition from a developing country to a developed country. And again, since World War II, not too many countries have become developed, okay? And I think that's why sort of, Korea sort of stands out. Korea is also the only country to transform from a recipient country of official development assistance to a significant donor. So until recently, Korea was a recipient of aid, okay? But now it is donating money for aid. So in 2020 alone, Korea provided $2.25 billion in foreign aid, okay? So again, I'm sorry for saying again and again, Korea is the only country which transformed from a recipient of aid to a donor of aid, okay? So next impressive stuff is this 30-50 Club. Has anyone heard of 30-50 Club? Or here it is. Korea became a 7th member of the 30-50 Club in 2019, which means how many countries are there in the world? About 190 something, right? Out of 190 some countries, there are only 7 countries who are members of this club. Okay? And I'll tell you what this club refers to. 30 means gross national income per capita of $30,000. 50 means population size of 50 million or higher. Okay? Now, why do you think this matters? Anyone with a thought? And let me ask you this. When you think of a country with a high living standard, do they typically have huge population or small population? Small population. You could think of countries like Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Qatar, Lithuania, you name it. They're typically have small population of like 2 million, 5 million, and so on. Okay? That's why this club is very meaningful. It's very hard to have a high per capita income when you have a big population. Okay? So here is, so again, Korea reached over $31,000 per capita GNI in 2019, and in 2023, it's over $33,000. Okay? So going back to this point about having small population, right now, there are only 27 countries in the whole world with a over $30,000 per capita GNI. 27. Out of 27, 20 are countries with small population. Like these: Sweden, Ireland, Denmark, Singapore, Austria, Iceland, and so on. Okay? So again, there are only 7 countries with more than 50 million population which have per capita GNI of $30,000, and guess which those countries are? Before Korea became a 7th member, these 6 countries were already members of 30-50 Club. And they are? Japan, US, UK. Very good. I'm pointing at you. Very good. So she said Japan, US, UK, Germany, yes. France, yes. Did I pronounce it right? France? Sorry. Just kidding. France. One more. To this question, a lot of people say like Canada, but its population is only 37 million. Australia, like not even 30 million, right? So the last one is, I'll give you a hint. It's in Europe. Yes, very good. Italy. So here we go. US, UK, Germany, France, Japan, Italy. Korea has joined that elite group. So again, maybe I'm exaggerating too much, but this shows you that it is very difficult to have a high living standard, which is indicated by per capita GNI, when there is a huge population. And that huge population, here it's 50 million or more. Another noteworthy fact about Korea becoming the 7th member of the 30-50 Club is that the country's per capita GNI was only $67 in 1953. Okay? But it was over $30,000 in 2023. So its per capita GNI jumped over 500 times. Okay? Other members' GNI per capita during the same period jumped dozens of times at the most. Okay? So the reason I'm showing you this is this. Per capita GDP of Korea and Japan. You see, there is a talk in Korea that maybe one day, at least as far as per capita GDP is concerned, Korea could catch up with Japan. I mean, as for country GDP, I don't think it's possible in our lifetime. Okay? Because to begin with, Japanese population is 2.5 times larger. And its current GDP total is more than 2.5 times larger than Korea. So it's not possible for Korea to catch up in that regard. But at least with per capita GDP, it's a possibility because as of 2021, the difference is only like not even $5,000. Okay? And it is true, not it is true, but anyway, let's leave it at that. And for your interest, I also have this South Korea and North Korea comparison, and you can see how until the mid-1970s, North Korea and South Korea, its economic performance was very similar. Okay? But since the mid-1970s, you can see how this is South Korea, this is North Korea. Okay? So as of the most recent data show that for North Korea in 2021, per capita GDP was $654. As for South Korea in 2022, it was over $33,000. So the difference of, about 55 times, right? And Korea is a major exporter in the world economy. As of 2022, Korea is the world's 9th largest exporting country with total export values of $803 billion. And exports accounted for nearly a half of total Korean economic output in 2022. Okay? Just for fun, which is the number one exporting country in the world? Yes, it's China. Okay. Just for your interest, I put that in because you sort of wonder, what does Korea export? Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with like cars, okay, which is up there, but the number one is semiconductor. Okay, but you know what is really interesting here? Number 5. That includes refined oil. Does Korea have any oil reserve? We don't, right? Not a single drop of oil. But how do we export refined oil? This is what we do. We import crude oil and we refine it and we export at a much higher value-added price. Okay? So anyway, semiconductor, I mean, it's good, but I think there is slight overdependence on one item, because if that gets pushed out, I think our economy, especially export sector, will be hurt, okay, greatly, okay. So automobile, Hyundai, Kia, right, and South Korea's top trading partners, China number 1, number 2, US, Vietnam, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Australia, Mexico, and so on. Okay? So maybe last year, US took over China as number 1 sort of trading partner, but you know, for the last 2 decades or longer, China has been number 1 trading partner of Korea. Okay? Korea is also one of the world's largest importers. So of course you're not going to remember, and you're not required to memorize the numbers or figures here, but it's safe to say that Korea is one of the world's largest exporter and importer, okay? Both, right? And largest importer in the world is? Yes, US. You know, all of this, you know, whether it's total GDP, membership in the 30-50 club, or what did we just talk about now? You know, Korea being one of the world's largest exporter and one of the world's largest importer. All of these are remarkable because, did you know that do you know the magazine called The Economist? See, outside the USA, it's the best known magazine, okay? It's also highly regarded because it's not US centered like Time. It covers the whole world. And anyway, The Economist had this section where it ranked countries that are least likely to develop. It's like a top 10 list of the old Letterman show, right? Top 10 least likely countries to develop. And guess which country made the list on a regular basis in the 1950s and 60s? It was South Korea. Okay? To give you a sense of how that was true, look at this. Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world as late as 1960. Okay? And when its GDP, mark this, Korea's GDP in 1960 was $1.9 billion. $1.9 billion, lower than these countries. Take a look. I'm sure you know these countries, right? Ecuador, Peru, Thailand, Algeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Pakistan, Colombia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Philippines. Okay? Is there any name that you're not familiar with? Maybe Congo, right? But anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that all of these countries were richer than Korea in 1960. Okay? Where do you think they stand now? Is Ecuador as rich as Korea today? What about Peru? What about Pakistan? What about Colombia? Okay? Now I have numbers to prove it, and I hope I'm not being rude here, okay? I'm just pointing these out. GDP in 1960, Korea. GDP in 2023, Korea. And take a look. Did this happen accidentally? It just, something must have been done. Something must have happened. And that's what we're going to do for the next two classes. What happened? What did Korea do right? Were there any international circumstances that made it happen? Were there any role played by Korean workers themselves? Did they work hard, or did they work under oppressive labor regime? Whatever the case may be, right? So just looking at these numbers and these country cases, you can see how, again, Korea just stands out. And sometimes, I do get to travel to many other Asian countries, and some of these countries are still so poor, and I'm always disheartened. Why do these countries still stay poor, right? So that's another question we'll be tackling. Why do countries still remain poor? Okay? Sometimes it's because of, lack of resources. But, what other factors could there be for certain countries to still remain poor? Okay? So this is a question we'll get back to later. Okay? From rags to riches. A country once known as poor and helpless country, Korea has emerged from the ruins of the 1950-1953 Korean War and a division into two hostile countries to be one of the largest economies in the world, setting a miracle in the history of world economics. Korean economic development is dubbed the miracle on the Han River. Does that ring a bell? Is there any other economy where the term miracle was applied to? Does anybody know? There are only two economies where its development or recovery, the term miracle was applied to. One, as you see here, is Korea. Okay? The other one it's called the miracle on the Rhine. Okay? So this was first used back like half a century ago when West Germany, okay? The World War II just totally destroyed West Germany, right? But following the end of World War II, in like 10, 20 years, West Germany made a speedy recovery and was able to reconstruct its economy in a very fast fashion. The world was so amazed, it gave it a name, the miracle on the Rhine. So my question to you is this: Miracle on the Han River, the Miracle on the Rhine, is the comparison appropriate? You know, and the additional question is this: is there anything about the economic miracle of the two countries that are fundamentally different, that set them apart? I mean, it's a miracle, but different kind of miracle. So how are these two miracles different? Anyone? Yes. Okay, that's right answer. You know, you're hitting the nail in the coffin. Is that the kind of right? You're right on it, but I could qualify your answer by saying this. Again, Germany is noted for making this rapid economic reconstruction and development following World War II, right? Now, here it is. Like Diana mentioned, you see Germany, if you watched enough World War II movies, you know Germany was a technology super house, okay? It had everything: submarine, airplanes, tanks, armored cars, and of course they have these world's best automobiles, right? So they had all these technological know-how. So it was just a matter of rebuilding because they had everything they needed, which is most importantly technological know-how. What about Korea? Did Koreans have these technology to build trains even? Cars? They had nothing. I'm not kidding. Any technological know-how, only the Japanese had it. And when the colonial period ended, they just took whatever they knew back home. So I'm not in any way sort of not appreciating what Germans did, because I have a total respect for their industriousness, ingenuity and all that. But as far as the courses that these two countries took to be where they are, I think the starting point was definitely different, very different. Okay? So in the case of Korea, Korea really started from scratch. There was no technology, there was no capital, there was no natural resource to speak of, no nothing. So that's why it is said that Korean economy was built on human capital, right? Sweat and blood, in other words. Okay. So another difference is that whereas industrial West, it took over a century. Okay, like following the Industrial Revolution, many countries did participate in this industrialization process, and by the let's say 1950, we're talking about countries having industrialized over a century. Okay, whereas for Korea, it only took like 40 years to industrialize. Okay? Also, Germany was never a colony, at least in modern period, but Korea was a colony for 36 years, and this is when blood was just taken out of Korea in a poetic sense. Okay, so anyway, so I hope you could appreciate this point about how the miracle of these two countries' economic development is qualitatively very different. Okay? Korea's achievement is also noteworthy because it happened to a country that was not only devoid of natural resources, capital, technological know-how, but was also so poor. I don't know if this is a well-known fact to you, but as late as the early 1980s, not every Korean had 3 meals a day. Rice was a luxury, believe it or not. Okay? And do you think kimchi was a staple food for every Korean? No, if you didn't have money. Okay? So even kimchi was a luxury for some people, and some resorted to eating potatoes instead of rice. Okay? Can you imagine potatoes and sweet potatoes with kimchi? For some, that was the way to eat meal. And here are some jokes from that period of time. I don't know if you know Johnny Yoon, but he was a stand-up comedian of Korean heritage who was popular for some time in the US. And he became very famous for saying this line. Here we go. He joked on a national television in the US. Quote, "We're so poor that when a burglar broke into our house, we robbed him." Okay? And here's another joke. "Wife, I knew you were poor, but I didn't know you were this poor." So she was complaining to her husband, right? And the husband went, "I told you, you are everything I have." Not a good one? Anyway, the two jokes about sort of poor Koreans at the time, all right? These are some pictures which show contrast between undeveloped Korea and developed Korea. And here we go. This is a picture from like right after the war, but this is more from peaceful time. This is a picture from Seoul in 1960. Cheongnam is near, it's like a 15-minute walk from here, right? Namdaemun Market in the 1950s. Namdaemun today. Jongno Street in 1953. Jongno Street today. Seoul Station in the early 1960s. Seoul Station today. Killer picture is waiting for you. This is Cheonggyecheon. It's also nearby here, right? If you walk like 15-20 minutes. Cheonggyecheon in the 1950s and Cheonggyecheon today. Oops. This is another Cheonggyecheon picture, but this exact same place looks like this today. Have you visited this Cheonggyecheon? Downtown, you gotta go if you're going back home after this semester. This is central Seoul, Gwanghamun. Okay? It's really nice if you walk along the stream in the evening. You know, if I had it my way, I would set up so many restaurants along the street here for night, time of drinking, and wouldn't that be nice? But there's not a single outdoor restaurant nearby. Seoul, sometime in the 1950s, I guess. And this is Seoul today. And if you haven't visited Namsan Tower, that's another place you gotta go. It's not like $100 where you have to pay like in some tourist places in the West, but I think it's only like $10, $20. You really get a nice panoramic view of Seoul. Okay? And they have a revolving restaurant, and the cost of a typical meal is only like $10, $15. Believe it or not. Okay? This was back in 1970 when having a phone at home was a true sign of wealth. Okay? So people had to line up to use a phone, right? Public phone. Okay, so Korea has thus transformed from one of the poorest countries in the world to an economically advanced nation in a relatively short span of time. The question is, what are the factors that facilitated the remarkable economic development of Korea? Okay, this is a good essay question, isn't it? Yeah? Most specifically, what are the domestic and international factors from the 1960s to the 1980s that set the stage for the country's transformation into one of the leading economies of the world today? Again, for Korea to have achieved this economic success in such a rapid fashion, again, things did not happen accidentally, okay? Well, some international factors may have happened accidentally, but much else was by design. So we have to know what happened, what went right for Korea to achieve its economic success, okay? Also, the question is, can Korea's success model be duplicated elsewhere today? This question is important because many developing countries do want to develop, and they want a model to emulate, and they see that model in Korea. So I ask you to think about this question. So let's say I tell you all these factors, and if I ask you, from what we talked about, what do you think? What factors could be emulated and what factors cannot be emulated? I want you to think about that, all right? And be able to tell me if this is on the final exam, right? And another question is, why do some countries still remain poor? What are the factors? And for this question, I don't know if I'll have time to tackle this question, but look up this book. It's called The Bottom Billion. Okay, the name of the book is The Bottom Billion. And it specifies 4 traps that countries face or have that make them stay poor. Okay? You know, close to 20% of the world population live in very dire situations, meaning they live in countries where poverty is widespread and they live like $1 a day, live on $1 a day, right? And so again, is it just their fault? Or, you know, is there sort of a certain roles played by the government, played by society that make this persistence of poverty to continue, okay? So again, if you have time, look up The Bottom Billion. And you don't have to read the whole book because the book has become popular enough that a summary is on the Wikipedia entry, okay? So if you read that, you already feel like you read the whole book and you already feel sort of enriched because just knowing that book, I think, makes you have a lot of things to say about this topic. Okay? Again, why do some countries still remain poor? Okay? And we'll discuss these questions today and in next week's class. All right? So, to move on, factors for Korea's economic success. And my question to you is this, before I share with you what I have, what are the factors that facilitated the remarkable economic development of Korea? Anyone? Yes. So human capital, correct, but to be more specific, diligence of Korean workers. Okay? So that's one. Yes. Yes. So it'll be a separate factor. Confucian. So one is the role of Korean workers. Second, not in any particular order, Confucianism. Okay, so we'll learn what the role of certain Confucian ethics that made possible Korea's economic achievement. Okay, all right, those are two. Anything else? Yes. We're talking about, so maybe I should make this specific, between 1960s to the 1980s. And for your information, where does foreign direct investment mostly go? Where does the money go? Do they typically go to developing countries or developed? Believe it or not, more money goes to developed countries when it comes to foreign direct investment, because you cannot just think of foreign direct investment as foreigners investing money to, build plants. More money goes as a foreign direct investment in the form of stock investment. So I think you make a very interesting point, but it's usually not included as a factor for Korea's economic success, at least historically. Foreign direct investment may be important now, but at least during this critical period, it did not play a role because Korea was still seen as a undesirable place to invest because of the threat from North Korea, okay? Especially. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the geographical location, meaning being close to North Korea, did play a role, but that resulted in something different. Okay, so did everyone get what she said? Because South Korea is closely geographically close to North Korea, Koreans felt that they needed to develop so that they could withstand the threat of North Korean aggression, right? Is that okay? But the point about geographical location is correct, but that did not necessarily. Well, I think I'm gonna get back to your point later, in the form of nationalism. Okay, because when nationalism kicked in to make Koreans work hard, it was about how we needed to become stronger than North Korea so that we could thwart another North Korean attack, or that we could prevent potential attack from North Korea. Okay? But the geographical location I'm talking about is this. I'm talking about the role of the U.S. aid. Okay? I mean, why do you think U.S. provided aid to Korea? It was because South Korea was close to North Korea, and if North Korea attacked South Korea, and there was this sense of crisis that unless South Korea could withstand the North Korean attack, Japan would also be threatened, right? So Korea was in a strategic sort of place for the U.S. to actively help Korea economically and also militarily, at least until the until the 70s. Okay, so we have now three factors, right? Korean workers, Confucianism, U.S. aid. Anything else? Yes. Export-oriented economy, and who does that? Government. So this is just like in Hallyu, right? The role of the government. Now, you're from the USA, right? Yeah. Oh, not from the US? Where are you from? Okay. I think we had this thing about Dominican Republic being part of the USA, right? Now, who's American? Okay. In the US, is the government heavily involved in the affairs of the national economy, where it sets goals, it sets these industrial policies to direct the economy in desired direction, yes or no? Typically, most countries, government is not heavily involved in the economy. I mean, it sets the interest rate and all that, but pretty much it lets the economy take its own course. But Korea is not the case. The government is heavily involved in the economic affairs of the country, like in Japan. Okay, that's why there's a name for it: guided capitalism. Okay. So that applies to Japan, and I think to a certain extent also applies to China, where the government is heavily involved in the affairs of the national economy. Okay? And when I say guided capitalism, nobody says anything good or bad about it. It's just that it's a different style. Okay? So guided capitalism is also called state-led. Okay? State-led economy, and so on, right? Anything else? We have 4 now, right? Government role, the role of the government, Confucianism, role of workers, and what am I missing? Role of workers, Confucianism, role of the government, US aid, thank you. Any other factors? Yes? Ooh. She said democratization, and it's an interesting answer, but it's not on the list. Sorry. Yes? Education goes to the role of workers. They're not only hardworking, but they were also talented because of education. They were well trained or well trainable, right? Anything else? One more before I close the floor. And yes. So during the military rule, what did you say? So during the sort of a period of dictatorship, the long-term economic goal was set. See, you're a little bit too far from where I'm standing. And say one more time, please, and everyone stay quiet. So I don't know if I get you correctly, but during the military sort of authoritarian period, all the national goals were geared towards economic development. So I think that goes with the role of the government. Okay, the government made it an ultimate priority to develop the economy. We had our own share of dictatorship. At least if the word dictatorship is too strong, authoritarian ruler. From the founding of the republic in 1948, until this president who was assassinated in 1979. So we're talking about 30 years during which we had an authoritarian ruler, and at least this guy who was responsible, who's given credit for Korea's development, all he ever did and all he ever thought about was economic development. Now, throughout history of the world, there have been many dictators, yes or no? And what did they do? They did nothing for their economy. They just partied and took the money and run. But not this guy. I'm talking about Park Chung-hee. He, for some distractors, they blame him for, violating human rights and suppressing labor movement. But, I like to ask them if they could come up with any champion of democracy who did so much for the country's economic development. So I'm not saying I'm in total favor of this guy, Park Chung-hee, but we have to at least recognize the fact that, yes, he violated human rights, he oppressed laborers' rights and labor movement, but at the same time, he happens to be the only dictator that I know, who achieved economic development, as in the case of Korea. Okay? Now, countries that have more democracy, like, I don't know if I sound that I'm picking on a particular country, but let's say I'm not picking on any country. There are so many poor countries in Asia, right? They've had democracy for the last century or so. So if you ask me to take the Korean case or the country that it has democracy but is still poor, I'll take the Korean case anytime. You know what I'm saying? We had our share of authoritarian rule. Yes, our economic achievement came with a price, but maybe it was worth the price, because we're not talking about massacre here. We're not talking about genocide. We're talking about case of, again, human rights violation to a certain extent, not widespread, okay? But anyway, if I talk too much about this, maybe not a good thing, okay? Yes? Oh, I'm just using it broadly speaking. We're talking about laborers, like on strike. The police would raid where they're staging their strike and lock them up. Okay, that's the kind of human rights violation I'm talking about. Okay, now I cannot even list all the factors that have been mentioned, but I do remember U.S. aid, role of workers, Confucianism, role of the government. Okay, before I show you what I have, one more. Anyone? Last call. Okay, so if we have time, we will also talk about the role of Jebo. Is that a blessing or a curse? The reason I'm saying is this. Jebo, you know what Jebo is, right? Conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK. They account for anywhere between 70 to 90% of the Korean economy. Their economic activities account for, again, anywhere between 70 to 90% of Korea's GDP. Let's just stick with the moderate number, 70%. Guess what percentage of workers work for 재벌, including part-time workers? It's less than 15%. So is that a good thing? You have this powerful 재벌, but they're doing so little for job creation. In fact, they kill competition. Do you think you could create anything to compete against the Samsung product? Impossible. Okay? They just kill it right away. So that's the thing about having 재벌 in our society, because we have this 재벌 mentality. You know what that 재벌 mentality is? We like to buy 재벌 goods. We think they're the best. Young people want to work for 재벌. And yet, when you look inside, what's not creating jobs? It's because 재벌 have so much power, and they kill competition. There's no sense of coexistence. Everything is a zero-sum game. Okay? So we'll talk more about this later. Anyway, here are the factors that I've prepared, and see how far we go today. So these factors account for the economic growth of Korea. Okay? 1, international factors. 2, the role of leadership. 3, the role of the Korean government. 4, role of culture, Confucianism. 5th, the role of Korean workers. 6, the role of nationalism. 7, the role of timing. Wow, quite a few factors to speak of, right? Okay, first, so again, we have 7 factors. And I think this one is divided into many factors. Okay, so we're gonna go one by one. All right, and I think we have time just to cover international factors today, and the rest will be covered next week. Okay, international factors. Can you think of any international or external factors which facilitated Korea's industrialization from the 1960s to the 1980s? One was already mentioned, and that is US aid, right? But before that, can you think of any political event that shaped Korea's future? In the 20th century? No. Something more momentous. I've been mentioning this throughout the lecture. Something that happened to Korea in the 20th century that had a significant impact on Korean history, Korean politics, and so on. If you think about major events of Korea in the 20th century, I'm sure the first thing that should come to your mind is Korean War. But before that, yes, Japanese colonial period. So, first international factor to talk about is the international colonial period. So, I put a question mark. Did it really help Korea's economic development? Yes or no? So we're going to talk about that, right? So we have two interpretations. One says, heck, no. It's all Koreans doing. The other side goes, well, Koreans did things right, but Japanese laid the foundation for later development. So See which side you take sides with, okay? And I'll cover my eyes so that I don't see you, okay? Second is US aid. Third, normalization treaty between South Korea and Japan in 1965. And in case you don't quite get what that is, again, Korea was liberated from Japan in 1945. Now, do you think Koreans were happy that they were finally liberated and finally on their own? Yes, they were happy, but do they have a good memory of what happened to them during the Japanese colonial period? Yes or no? Terrible. It was traumatic. So guess what happened? So for 20 years, since the liberation, the two countries did not have a normal relationship, meaning no diplomatic relationship, no flights between Korea and Japan, no Japanese song played on the radio, no Koreans visiting Japan, no Japanese coming to Japan. You know what I'm saying? There was no relationship between the two countries. But they normalized the relationship in 1965. Guess which country brokered this? If you're to take a guess. US. Why? For one thing, Japan is USA's number one ally in the whole world. Okay? So to see, Korea not getting along well with Japan was always a thorny issue. They finally solved this, at least, as a bandage solution, because, that may have happened, but we still have this sore spot, right? Anyway, the fourth international factor is the Vietnam War. And I'm sorry to say this, but war does bring benefits to certain countries. Guess which countries benefited from wars economically? But to this question, this country should jump right at you. Number one is? US. When? World War II. When did the Great Depression happen in the USA? 1929. And when did USA get involved in the World War II? Like 1939 or 19 whatever, right? But you see, USA was in terrible economic shape until it got involved in the war, because that's when all the factories were running. Women began to work in earnest in factories and stuff, right? So it revived the American economy because of its involvement in the war. And what about other examples? Another country should jump at you also, along with the US. Number two is Japan. Okay? When Korean War broke out in 1950 and it lasted until 1953, USA sent a large contingent of soldiers. And where did they get their supplies from? Did they get their supplies from Hawaii or from the mainland or from Japan? From Japan. They had everything they wanted made in Japan. And Japan, which was reeling from the devastation of World War II, it had a major big boost in its economic development from the Korean War. And guess what? If Korea benefited from one war, Japan benefited from two wars. One was Korean War, second was Vietnam War. Same thing with the Korean War. USA sent even more troops, much bigger contingent to Vietnam. Where did they get their supplies from? Hawaii or mainland US or Japan? Japan. So Japan had a second wave of economic rejuvenation because of the Vietnam War. Okay? You can almost say that Japan would not be what it is today without these two wars. That's how much they benefited from these wars. Okay? Unintentionally, because, it was, U.S. needed supplies made from countries which were allies and also close by, right? So Japan happened to be at the right place and at the right time. Okay? Sort of jumped ahead because I'll be talking about all of these in sequence, one by one. But anyway, colonial development. So there is no academic consensus on whether the influence of the Japanese rule was positive or negative for the development of Korea. Okay? So again, I hope you could take sides, at least on your own, right? And see how you lean toward one argument over the other. Okay? There are two opposing views, orthodox and revisionist. So you may be confused by, is it orthodox or revisionist? But to simplify things, revisionist came later. Okay? Whenever something is tagged a revisionist, it's an idea that came later. Okay? So the original idea was that when Koreans were so happy that they were proud of their achievement, these revisionists came and said, hey, you did nice, but you cannot forget that there was this country by the name of Japan which helped you to be where you are. Okay? So again, I'm trying to make this simpler for you because when I was a student, I always got mixed up, orthodox versus revisionist. And I hope you don't have the same mistake. Okay? So anyway, according to the orthodox interpretation of colonial development, again, Korea was a colony of Japan from 1910 to 1945. And now, instead of just showing you what I have, when colonizers colonize lands, why do they do that? What do they have to gain from colonizing a new land? Yes, you see, if there was nothing to gain, they would not colonize, right? They do that for reasons, and one way is to access resources for free. When the colonizers take over a country, they take over everything. The ownership is no longer in the hands of the colonized. Not all the time, right? But what happened was, in many cases, some countries just did not have the sense of ownership. Like in the case of Native Americans. When the Europeans landed in North America, these Native Americans did not have a sense of ownership of land. Because land owned was, again, it was not to be owned by humans. I think it really had a profound sort of philosophy behind it, right? So let me not go too deep into this, where the indigenous people did not have the sense of ownership. It was true in the case of North American Native Americans, but in many other places, I'm sure many people had ownership, with that I really need to look into, because some places may not have had. How do you prove your ownership if you don't have a paper to sign or paper document, right? I'm thinking. Anyway, resources and what else? What do colonizers take from colonized lands? Slaves or labor power, right? So anyway, here we go. Extract natural resources, exploit labor, create new market for its products, they always did that, right? They sold what they produced at exorbitant prices, right? And fourth, build new trade routes. This is what colonizers do. And guess what Japan did in Korea? Same thing, okay? Extracted rice from Korea, extracted natural resources from North Korea, okay? And exploit labor, they did. You know, they forced millions of Koreans to go overseas as forced laborers and so on, right? So this is the argument of orthodox interpretation. This is what Japan did in Korea during the colonial period, okay? And what else? Orthodox interpretation claims that every economic policy and development carried out during the Japanese colonial period was to satisfy Japan's needs. For example, if Japan built roads, built railways, built harbors, was that to make the life of Koreans more convenient so that they could travel around more conveniently? Yes or no? No, it was to transport, right? Resources they extracted. And this is not just a uniquely Korean. It happened everywhere where land was colonized. Roads were built, and if there were railways, they were all constructed to make transportation of what they extracted more conveniently. And can you say that, you know, if England colonized India and built railways to extract resources, and for India to say 50 years later, hey, you know, we built the railroad for you. What are you complaining about? Does that make sense? Maybe it's not a good analogy, but you get my point, right? The whole purpose of a colonizer is not, again, for the benefit of the colonized. It's all for the purpose for their own benefit, okay? And that applies to everything they built, okay? You know, roads, railways, harbors, and so on. So the point again, whatever they did for Korea was for their own goods, for their own good, and for their own needs, okay? Virtually all large industries in Korea were owned by the Japanese. Okay, so, you know, if any Korean was an entrepreneur, it was a small business. I mean, there were a few exceptions, of course, maybe a handful. But again, all the major industries were all owned by the Japanese. Large tracts of farmland were both legally and illegally taken over by the Japanese, which forced a large number of Korean farmers to become sharecroppers, to migrate to Japan or Manchuria as forced laborers. Okay? So this is what happened. And I told you about how sort of this legal ownership of land is sometimes not properly in place in countries that were not modernized, right? So during the Japanese colonial period, they did carry out this policy called land reform, and farmers had to prove with paper their ownership of land. And their failure to do so meant that the land was taken over by the Japanese. Okay? But for some Koreans, their sense of ownership was sort of a word of mouth. Okay? You know, like historical tradition, kind of, right? So, Orthodox interpretation continued. Most Koreans at the time could access only a primary school education under restriction by the Japanese. You know, when I say most, I'm saying of those who were educated. But, you know, large majority simply could not even get a elementary education. Okay? And factories, and this is also important. Factories and infrastructure that the Japanese built during the colonial period were all destroyed during the Korean War. So if you just stop here and you may go, wow, what did the Japanese do, right? But then you gotta listen to the other side, right? So anyway, in a nutshell, the Orthodox interpretation argues that Japanese colonial development was focused solely on the extraction of Korea's natural resources and the exploitation of Korean laborers. That Korea's industrialization has been achieved solely by Koreans themselves, and that Japan's colonial rule had no role. I mean, maybe you find this argument too extreme, but compare this with the following arguments by the revisionist argument. Revisionist interpretation on colonial development. So this view arose in the 1990s when Korea was achieving noticeable economic growth. So again, if the revisionist argument made this point back in 1950, saying something like this, I predict that Korea will become an industrialized nation, building on what Japan has done for the country. But that did not happen. They came up with this idea only after Korea made an achievement. It was like after the fact. Okay? I'm already showing my sort of a bias here, right? But again, if the revisionist was really, really correct, I think they should have made this point 40 years sooner. Okay? But they did not. They only made this point after Korea was already achieving a significant economic growth. Okay? They argued economic developments did occur during the period. Okay? The Japanese colonial experience laid the foundation for later economic development in Korea. So this is a key point. 2 points. Economic developments did occur during the period, and that Japanese colonial period experience laid the foundation for later economic development in Korea. Okay, so see what I have. The Korean economy went through significant changes during the Japanese colonial period as the Japanese government, so I'm missing a line here. The Korean economy went through significant changes during the Japanese colonial period as the Japanese government introduced many modern economic and social institutions, invested in infrastructure, built rice mills, textile factories, oil refineries, shipyards, etc. To these, the Orthodox interpretation would argue that they did all this for their own good, right? First, Korean businessmen, bureaucrats, technicians, and white-collar workers were trained under the Japanese colonial system. Since the early 1930s, Japan built large-scale industries in Korea as part of war preparation, all of which helped Korea's industrialization, which began in the early 1960s. Maybe I'm going too fast. In a nutshell, the revisionists argue that the Japanese colonial rule played a role in helping Korea industrialize as it laid the foundations for a later development of the Korean economy. So again, this is still being debated among scholars in and outside of Korea, and I wonder what your thought is. But I do have to admit, you know, the former president who is credited with Korea's industrialization, he was trained under the Japanese system, and he highly admired Japanese development, and to a certain extent, he tried to emulate Japan's success. Okay? Now, whether that accounts as a, you know, Japanese colonial rule laying the foundation for later development is open to debate. Okay? But given these two opposing arguments, I hope you could develop your own argument. Okay? Taking sides. Don't be afraid to take sides, because sometimes life requires you to take sides. Okay? Not taking sides is also taking sides, as the saying goes, right? Anyway, thank you, and I will see you next week. And that will be our last class